I'm assuming no one in here is a murderer, right? No one's killed anyone? Okay. Assuming you've never killed anyone, is it... Ava?
I have two things.
Huh?
I have two things.
Two banks.
Things.
Two fangs. Oh. Is it fair to you if God decides to pardon the sins of a murderer? Assuming you've never killed anyone, is it fair to you for God to forgive a murderer? I guess you need to ask the question, can God forgive murderers? Is anyone beyond God's reach? Is anyone beyond God's grace? It's easy to ask the question, is God fair? It's really easy to say, I feel like it's okay to ask this question, is God fair when bad things happen to me? Right? When I lose my job, when someone betrays me, when I come down with this unexplainable illness, and I say, oh, is God fair? And it seems like it's easy to question the fairness of God. But the reality of it is we've got skin in the game when we think God is being good to someone that we don't believe deserves it. That's when we really question, is God fair? When something good happens to someone and we say they don't deserve it because of whatever action, attitude, behavior, whatever. That's when we really have skin in the game. That's when it's really interesting. That's when it really sinks home. So the parable here in Matthew chapter 20 is that of a landlord. He's an owner. He's a master of the house. And Jesus is making a comparison. He says the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a house. Right? So he's going to go out. He's going to go out in the morning, and he's going to find people, and he's going to recruit them. And he's going to make an arrangement with them. Right? So the image you want in your mind in ancient days, first of all, when you went into the city proper, usually there were gates, and there would be chairs in the gates. And the elders of the community, the wise men, they would sit in the gate and they would discuss the events, civil things, legal things, stuff like that. But inside, you could imagine a fountain, or you could imagine a local gathering place, and day laborers would go there, and they would wait for some homeowner, landowner, farmer to come and hire them for the day. They didn't live on the farm. They weren't hired full-time. They weren't seasonal. They would just be expected to work for a day. And so the homeowner goes, the master, he goes and he agrees with them for a denarius. That's basically $1. Right? There's the wage. You're going to get $1 a day. And so at different periods of the day, he goes out. Right? First thing in the morning, mid-morning, noontime, late afternoon, end of the day. Right? He goes out and he recruits them and he brings them in. And the punchline comes, right? Okay, foreman, I want you to pay them. We'll pay the guys who came last. Right? When do you send workers into the vineyard? If you're a vineyard owner, when do you send them in there? Probably times when you need to do a little pruning, right? Cut back some of the dead growth so the good stuff. There's probably not a lot of planting that goes on once the vineyard is operational. The hired day laborers, they wouldn't be responsible for that. The servants who stay year-round, they probably take care of some of that stuff. So what's probably going on here, it's probably harvest time, right? So the master wants to make sure he doesn't lose the crop, right? What is the purpose, after all, of sending harvesters into the vineyard? To save the grapes, right? You don't want them to rot on the vine. You want to be able to get your product, mash it, turn it into wine, whatever, right? So, homeowner's got something invested. He wants to make sure it goes well. And so he goes out downtown. Just like today, if you go into a big city, it's common for contractors to go down to Lowe's or Home Depot and find guys who aren't working. It still happens today. Say, come, I need you to tear out some drywall. I need you to come and do some landscaping, whatever, right? And so here he goes, the master, and he goes down there and he grabs them and he brings them into the what? Jesus says the kingdom, right? He's comparing this master to the kingdom. We wrestle with the idea of kingdom. It's not part of our regular vocabulary, right? When you talk about getting up on Sunday morning, what do you think about? You think about going to church, right? When you think about your relationship with God, you think about being a Christian or a disciple of Christ or whatever. Jesus almost always uses the idea of a kingdom. Why? Because God is in control. God is the one who has full reign over us. Jesus says, kingdom is like this master. We wrestle with the idea of the kingdom, but you know what we wrestle with even more? Who's in the kingdom? Who belongs in the kingdom? Who is deserving to reap the rewards of the kingdom? I know you won't say it out loud, and you'd be embarrassed to acknowledge it, but most of us, if we're honest, will say we don't believe certain people are as deserving of the kingdom or a place in the kingdom as we are ourselves. How could they be equally placed in the kingdom? You fill in the blank. So what are the requirements of a laborer here, right? The master of the house goes out to find people to labor in his vineyard. What are some of the requirements? A willingness to work. In today's economy and construction, that is hard to find, right? Nobody wants to work. But they've got a willingness to work, right? I guess they have to be able to be obedient, to follow orders, to follow direction, right? Go out, get these grapes, bring them in. Can you do it? Yes, good. You're hired, right? Probably the ability to know their place. You're not the foreman, you're not the master, you're just a simple laborer. It seems to be about proximity, right? They're in the local city. The master grabs them, brings them, takes them out, has them work in the vineyard. And basically, to be a laborer, you just got to make yourself available. Be willing, able, and available. You might notice something unique here about the fishermen in this parable. Oh wait, there are no fishermen in this parable. The homeowner, the landowner, the master doesn't go into the village. He doesn't pay the fishermen. He doesn't pay the wheat farmer. Who is it that he's rewarding at the end of the day? The laborers in the village. Who's rewarded? The laborers that go out into the vineyard. There's proximity. It's interesting, they answer the call. Is this a timeline about your life, right? Is this about always having known the Lord, and then some people becoming a believer later on in life, and some at the midnight hour? I think there's a good reason to look at it like that. It could also be different nations who come to know the Lord through the period of history. But those that are rewarded are those who are in proximity to the master. They are the ones who heeded the call, and they are the ones who are willing to go and work. So, what do you think the sin is that Jesus is trying to address here? Oftentimes when he's telling a parable, right, he wants to address a sin or an attitude or a behavior. What is it that he's hoping to change? I think a lot of times when we read this parable, we put ourselves in the parable and we kind of think of like in a sense, we think of like the masters, like our grandparents. And we're kind of like, oh yeah, you know, my grandfather gave me a bike, but he gave my cousin a pony. This is just so unfair. No, everybody gets a pony in this story. But it doesn't seem fair, right? That's what Jesus is addressing. This matter of the heart when you begrudge someone else. Why is it so hard for us to celebrate other people's victories, other people's wins? Why is it that we have such a hard time when people are doing good for us to be excited for them as much as so for ourselves? Is it because we're greedy? Is it because we're jealous? Is there envy? What's going on here, right? Everybody gets the pony in the story. Why such insecurity? What I think Jesus is addressing in this parable is our hearts. And more specifically, our view of God's generosity and His graciousness. Your time invested in the kingdom is probably irrelevant. You probably know a lot of people who have been believers for 20 years, 30 years, maybe more. But have they really been a believer for that long, or have they just done 1 year over and over for 20 years? Is there growth there? Is there development there? Is there maturity? And Jesus is saying, some people came in the kingdom at the beginning of the day and some at the midnight hour. The attitude that Jesus seems to be addressing is, well, we put in all the hard work, right? That's what they say. We bore the heat of the day. We've been here working hard all day. And you're going to reward them the same as us? That doesn't seem to be fair. We've put in the work. We've put in the effort. And they're going to get a pony too. They're going to get the same reward too. Maybe we would be happier and more fulfilled if we were less concerned about others and more focused on what God requires from us as an individual. Interesting, if you've read through Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19 finishes off, many who are first will be last. The end of this parable is, the last will be first and the first will be last. Are you okay with the last being first and the first being last? You probably better be okay with it, because that's exactly what Jesus says. Did you notice the use of friend in this parable? Let me see here if I can back this slide up. Verse 13. But he answered one of them, am I not being unfair to you, friend? Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? There's only twice that the Gospels use this word friend in the Greek. One, when Judas is going to betray Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus calls him friend. And then here, it's not necessarily a sarcastic word, but it's not the word for close friendship, camaraderie. That's not the friend here. It's a term for someone who's not really your friend. It's kind of like when we say to somebody that cuts us off in line, hey, buddy. Is that really our buddy? Notice how the homeowner, the landowner, the master talks to him. And something else that's interesting too. Verse 14. So here's the guy that worked all day, been there bearing the heat, the burden of the day. The master says, take your pay and what? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Take your pay and go. I hope I'm not reading too much into that, but it seems like the master of the vineyard, he's like, okay, I think our relationship is over. Here's your reward. I'm not sure that there's anything more that we have to do with each other. Take your pay and go. So at the end of the day, when I read through this parable, it makes me think, when we want to see people pay for their mistakes and to be punished more than we appreciate our own reward, there's a problem, and I'll just label the problem immaturity. I think that's the heart of the parable. Jesus is addressing our hearts and our level of maturity. Maturity is when we take personal responsibility for ourselves and our actions and our attitudes, and we quit focusing on other people and their problems. So the title of the sermon is God fair? That's the question. No. God is not fair. But we don't want fair. We don't want God to be fair, because where would that leave us if we got what we really deserved?